The morning sun cast a golden glow through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood quietly in her private study. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the official letter that had arrived just 3 days earlier. The words seemed to blur before her eyes, though she had read them countless times. William would be departing for a 6-month diplomatic mission to Australia and New Zealand, a journey that would take him farther from home than he had ever been for such an extended period. Catherine had always known that their lives would be filled with duty and service, but somehow this felt different. This wasn't just another royal engagement or a brief overseas tour. This was a separation that would test the very foundation of their marriage and family. She thought about their 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, who were still sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their father would soon be an ocean away. The decision had not been made lightly. The Commonwealth nations needed strong representation during a critical time of political and economic uncertainty. William's presence would help strengthen diplomatic ties and support various humanitarian initiatives that were close to both their hearts. Catherine understood the importance of the mission, but understanding and accepting were 2 very different things. She walked to the window and gazed out at the gardens where their children often played. The roses were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the heaviness in her heart. William had been working late into the night for weeks, preparing for the mission, studying briefing documents and meeting with Foreign Office officials. She had watched him struggle with the decision, knowing how much it would cost them both personally. Their marriage had weathered many storms over the years. The constant scrutiny of the media, the pressures of royal protocol, and the weight of public expectation had tested them repeatedly. But through it all, they had remained united, drawing strength from each other in their shared commitment to service. This separation would be their greatest challenge yet. Catherine remembered their early days together at St. Andrews University, when they were just 2 young people trying to navigate love under extraordinary circumstances. William had been honest with her from the beginning about what a life with him would entail. There would be sacrifices, he had warned her, moments when duty would have to come before personal happiness. She had accepted this willingly, believing that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Now, as she prepared to say goodbye to her husband for 6 long months, Catherine wondered if she had been naive. The reality of royal life was more complex than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about attending ceremonies and cutting ribbons. It was about making impossible choices between family and duty, between personal desires and public responsibility. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted her thoughts. William appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his formal morning attire. His face showed the same mixture of determination and sadness that had been there for days. He crossed the room and took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring despite the circumstances. They stood together in silence, both knowing that words were inadequate for what they were feeling. The weight of unspoken fears and hopes hung between them like a bridge they both needed to cross. William's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of Catherine's hand, a gesture that had comforted her countless times before. Outside their window, London was beginning to wake up. Traffic hummed in the distance, and the first tourists of the day were already gathering near the palace gates, hoping for a glimpse of the royal family. These people looked to William and Catherine as symbols of stability and continuity, never knowing the personal costs of maintaining that image. Catherine had spent sleepless nights wondering how she would explain the separation to their children, how she would maintain their normal routines while managing her own emotions. George, their eldest, was old enough to understand that his father's work sometimes required travel, but 6 months seemed like an eternity to a young boy. Charlotte and Louis were still too young to fully comprehend time, but they would certainly feel their father's absence. The couple had made arrangements for regular video calls and had planned for Catherine to visit Australia with the children during the school holidays. But these measures felt like small bandages on a much larger wound. Nothing could truly replace William's physical presence, his goodnight kisses, or his steady hand during the children's difficult moments. As they prepared to face the day ahead, both William and Catherine knew that this goodbye would mark a turning point in their lives. They would need to find new ways to stay connected across the miles, new rhythms that could sustain their family during the separation. Most importantly, they would need to trust that their love was strong enough to endure this test, that the bonds they had built over years of marriage could withstand the strain of distance and time. The breakfast room at Kensington Palace felt unusually quiet, as the family gathered for what would be their last meal together for many months. George sat at his usual place, methodically eating his porridge while stealing glances at his father. Even at his young age, he could sense that something important was happening. Charlotte babbled happily in her high chair, completely unaware of the significance of the day, while baby Louis gurgled contentedly in Catherine's arms. William tried to maintain his normal, cheerful demeanor, making jokes and asking the children about their plans for the day, but Catherine could see the strain in his eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach them. She had learned to read his expressions over their years together, and right now she could see a man trying desperately to memorize every detail of this moment with his family. The staff moved quietly around them, packing the final items for William's journey. His private secretary had arrived early to review the schedule one last time, and security personnel were conducting their final checks. The palace, usually bustling with activity, seemed to hold its breath as everyone prepared for the prince's departure. Catherine had barely touched her tea. Her stomach was twisted in knots, and the thought of food made her feel nauseous. She watched William interact with their children, noting how he lingered over each conversation, how he seemed to be storing up these precious moments like treasures to sustain him during the long months ahead. After breakfast, William retreated to his study for final preparations, while Catherine helped get the children ready for their day. George would be going to school as usual, though his teacher had been briefed about the situation and would be watching for any signs that he was struggling with his father's absence. Charlotte and Louis would remain at the palace with Catherine, maintaining their normal routines as much as possible. The morning passed too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Each minute brought them closer to the inevitable goodbye, yet the hours seemed to drag with the weight of anticipation. Catherine found herself paying attention to small details she usually overlooked. The way William hummed while he shaved, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the particular way he laughed at something George said. Around midday, close friends and family members began arriving to see William off. His father had cleared his schedule to be present, understanding the magnitude of this departure. Catherine's parents came as well, offering their quiet support and help with the children during the transition period ahead. The presence of loved ones provided some comfort, but it also made the reality of the situation more acute. William spent individual time with each of his children, creating special moments that he hoped would sustain them both during the separation. With George, he sat on the floor of the nursery and explained once again why this trip was necessary, how it was part of serving their country and helping people in need. George listened solemnly, asking questions about Australia and when exactly his father would return. With Charlotte, William was more playful, engaging in their favorite games and reading her beloved bedtime stories even though it was the middle of the day. She giggled and clapped, not understanding that this was goodbye, simply enjoying having her father's undivided attention. William's voice caught slightly as he read the familiar words, knowing it would be months before he could read to her again in person. Baby Louis received the longest cuddle, with William holding him close and whispering promises to return soon. The baby looked up at his father with bright, trusting eyes, and William felt his heart break a little more. Louis was so young that he might not even remember his father clearly by the time William returned. This thought was almost unbearable, but William pushed it aside, focusing instead on the warmth of his son in his arms. Catherine watched these interactions with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. She was proud of how William was handling this difficult situation, how he was putting their children's needs first, even while dealing with his own emotions, but she was also heartbroken to see him say goodbye to the daily joys of fatherhood, even if it was temporary. As afternoon approached, the time for departure drew near. William's luggage had been loaded into the cars, and his security detail was ready to escort him to the airport. The children had been taken to another part of the palace by their nanny, sparing them the pain of watching their father actually leave. William and Catherine stood together in their private sitting room, the same room where they had shared countless quiet moments over the years. The walls held photographs of their wedding, their children's births, and family holidays. These images seemed to watch over them now, silent witnesses to the love story that had brought them to this difficult moment. They had already said most of what needed to be said in private conversations over the past few days. Now, facing the actual moment of departure, words seemed inadequate. Catherine straightened William's tie one last time, her fingers lingering on the familiar task that she had performed hundreds of times before. This simple gesture held all the love, worry, and hope that she couldn't express in words. The private sitting room felt charged with emotion as William and Catherine faced their final moments together. Through the windows, they could see the convoy of cars waiting in the courtyard, their engines running quietly in preparation for the journey to Heathrow Airport. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, but even they seemed to understand the gravity of this particular departure. Catherine had changed into a navy blue dress that William had always said was his favorite. She wore the sapphire earrings he had given her for their 5th anniversary, a small gesture of carrying something precious from him with her during his absence. William noticed these details immediately, his eyes softening as he recognized her thoughtful choices. They sat together on the sofa where they had spent countless evenings discussing their days, planning family activities, and simply enjoying each other's company. The cushions still held the impression of their usual spots, and Catherine found herself memorizing the way William's presence filled the space beside her. William pulled out a small wrapped package and placed it gently in Catherine's hands. Inside was a delicate gold locket containing a recent photograph of their family taken during Louis's christening. All 5 of them were laughing at something George had said, captured in a moment of pure joy and togetherness. Catherine opened the locket and felt tears welling in her eyes. William had engraved the back with the words, "Until we meet again," along with the date of his departure. It was a tangible reminder that this separation was temporary, that they would be reunited, and that their love would endure across any distance. In return, Catherine gave William a leather journal that she had specially commissioned. Inside the front cover, she had written letters from each of the children expressing their love in their own innocent words. George had drawn pictures of their family, Charlotte had attempted to write her name in wobbly letters, and Catherine had included Louis's tiny handprint in ink. The journal's pages were blank, waiting for William to fill them with his experiences, thoughts and feelings during the mission. Catherine hoped that writing would help him process the challenges ahead and give him a way to feel connected to home. She had also tucked in photographs throughout the pages, little surprises for him to discover during quiet moments. As they exchanged these gifts, both William and Catherine felt the weight of tradition and the power of small gestures to bridge great distances. These objects would serve as talismans, physical reminders of their love when words across video calls weren't enough. The sound of a gentle knock interrupted their private moment. William's equerry appeared in the doorway, his expression respectful but urgent. It was time to leave. The schedule was carefully planned to ensure William's arrival in Australia, aligned with important meetings and ceremonial obligations. William stood and straightened his jacket, transforming before Catherine's eyes from her husband into the Prince of Wales, ready to represent the crown on the world stage. But his eyes remained soft when he looked at her, revealing the man behind the title who was struggling with this separation just as much as she was. They walked together to the main entrance of the palace, their footsteps echoing in the grand hallway lined with portraits of previous generations who had faced their own challenges and separations. The weight of history and duty pressed down on them, but it also provided a strange comfort. They were part of something larger than themselves, contributing to a legacy of service that stretched back centuries. At the entrance, Catherine's parents waited with the children, who had been brought down to say one final goodbye. George stood tall, trying to be brave like his father had taught him, but his lower lip trembled slightly. Charlotte reached her arms up to William, wanting to be lifted one more time while Louis babbled happily, oblivious to the emotional gravity of the moment. William knelt down and gathered all 3 children into his arms, holding them as tightly as he dared without frightening them. He whispered words of love and promises to stay in touch, telling them how proud he was of each of them and how much they meant to him. The children clung to him, instinctively understanding that this hug was different from their usual goodbyes. Catherine watched this scene through tears she could no longer hold back. Seeing William with their children, knowing how much they all meant to each other, made the necessity of this separation feel almost cruel, but she also saw the strength in her husband, The way he was already thinking about how to make this easier for their children, how to turn this challenge into an opportunity for growth and understanding. After the children were gently led away by their grandparents, William and Catherine stood alone in the doorway. The convoy waited patiently, but these final seconds belonged only to them. William cupped Catherine's face in his hands, memorizing every detail, every freckle, every expression line that marked their years together. Their final kiss held all the passion, tenderness, and promise of their entire relationship. It was a kiss that needed to last for months to sustain them both through lonely nights and difficult days. It was a kiss that said everything they hadn't been able to express in words, a physical manifestation of love that would have to bridge thousands of miles. The moment of final departure arrived with the quiet efficiency that marked all royal occasions. William's security detail positioned themselves respectfully around the convoy, their trained eyes scanning the surroundings while allowing the couple their precious final moments together. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the ancient oak trees that had witnessed countless royal farewells over the centuries. Catherine walked with William to his car, her hand firmly clasped in his. Each step felt momentous, bringing them closer to a separation that both dreaded and accepted as necessary. The gravel crunched softly beneath their feet, a sound that seemed amplified in the emotional silence surrounding them. At the car door, William paused and turned to face Catherine one final time. The weight of 6 months stretched between them like an impossible chasm, yet the love in their eyes promised that this distance was merely physical. Their souls would remain connected across any ocean, any continent, any challenge that lay ahead. William's voice was steady but thick with emotion as he made his final promises. He would call every day at the same time so the children could maintain a routine. He would send videos of his activities so they could feel involved in his mission. Most importantly, he would count every day until his return, treating each one as a step closer to being reunited with his family. Catherine nodded through her tears, unable to trust her voice to remain steady. She had spent the morning rehearsing brave words to send him off with confidence and support, but now all that mattered was letting him know how deeply he was loved. Her hand smoothed his lapels one last time, a gesture both practical and deeply intimate. The car door opened and William stepped inside. Through the window, Catherine could see him settle into his seat, already beginning the mental transition from husband and father to royal ambassador. But his eyes remained fixed on her, drinking in her image as if to sustain him through the long journey ahead. As the convoy began to move, Catherine stood perfectly still in the courtyard, watching until the last car disappeared beyond the palace gates. The silence that followed felt absolute, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and the calls of birds in the garden. She remained there for several minutes, unwilling to turn away from the direction he had gone, as if her vigil could somehow keep him closer. Inside the palace, life continued with its practiced rhythm, but everything felt different without William's presence. Staff members moved with the same efficiency, but there was a subdued quality to their activities. Even they understood that the heart of the household had temporarily departed, leaving everyone to adjust to a new and unfamiliar rhythm. Catherine returned to the private sitting room where she and William had shared their final moments. His coffee cup still sat on the side table. The newspaper he had been reading that morning lay folded beside his chair. These small remnants of his presence felt both comforting and heartbreaking, tangible proof that he had been there just moments before. The children were brought back to her shortly after, and Catherine had to summon all her strength to appear calm and confident for their sake. George asked immediate questions about when he could video call his father, displaying a practical concern that reminded Catherine so much of William. Charlotte seemed to sense the change in atmosphere and stayed close to Catherine's side, her usual chatter replaced by unusual quietness. Baby Louis, mercifully, remained largely unaffected by the emotional undercurrents around him. He gurgled and played as usual, providing Catherine with precious moments of normalcy amid the upheaval. His innocent joy became an anchor for the family, reminding them that life continued and that happiness could still be found even during difficult transitions. As evening approached, Catherine established new routines that would help sustain the family during William's absence. Dinner became a special time for sharing stories and planning activities for the following day. She encouraged the children to draw pictures and dictate letters that could be sent to their father, giving them concrete ways to maintain their connection. The palace staff, understanding the challenges ahead, quietly adjusted their own routines to provide additional support. The children's nanny extended her hours, household managers took on extra responsibilities, and security protocols were modified to accommodate Catherine's new role as the sole royal parent in residence. That first evening, after the children were settled in bed, Catherine found herself alone in a way she hadn't experienced for years. The quiet felt overwhelming after the emotional intensity of the day. She walked through rooms that suddenly felt too large, past photographs that served as reminders of happier, complete family moments. In William's study, she noticed that he had left behind a small framed photograph of the two of them from their university days. They looked impossibly young and carefree, standing together on a Scottish beach with wind-blown hair and genuine, uncomplicated smiles. That photograph represented a time when their biggest concern was passing exams, and their love felt like the only thing that mattered in the world. Catherine picked up the photograph and held it carefully, remembering how simple life had seemed then. They had known challenges would come, but they had faced them with the invincible confidence of youth and love. Now, with 3 children and enormous public responsibilities, they were facing their greatest test yet, relying on that same love to carry them through months of separation. 3 weeks into William's mission, Catherine had begun to establish new rhythms that helped the family navigate their changed circumstances. The initial shock of his departure had given way to a determined effort to create stability and meaning in their daily lives. Each morning brought small victories and inevitable challenges as they learned to function as an incomplete unit while maintaining their connections across the vast distance. The video calls with William had become sacred family rituals, scheduled with the precision of state occasions, despite the time difference between London and Australia. They managed to find windows that allowed the children to share their daily experiences and receive their father's loving attention. George had become expert at positioning the camera to show William his latest school projects, while Charlotte delighted in singing songs and performing little dances for her father's delight. During one particularly touching call, Louis had taken his first independent steps while the camera was running. William watched through the screen as his youngest son wobbled across the nursery floor, his face a mixture of pride and heartbreak at missing this milestone in person. Catherine had grabbed the phone and followed Louis's uncertain steps, ensuring that William could witness every precious moment of this achievement. These technological bridges, while essential, also highlighted the painful reality of physical separation. William could see his children but couldn't scoop them up in his arms when they fell. He could hear their laughter but couldn't tuck them into bed or read their favorite bedtime stories in person. The screen became both a lifeline and a constant reminder of the distance between them. Catherine found herself documenting every detail of their lives for William's benefit, taking photographs of ordinary moments that suddenly seemed extraordinary in their significance. The children eating breakfast, playing in the garden, or simply sitting together became precious memories to share with their absent father. She created a digital diary that she sent to William each day, filled with snapshots of their world that he was missing. The children were adjusting in their own unique ways. George had begun keeping a journal, carefully recording questions he wanted to ask his father and experiences he wanted to share. His teachers reported that he was more thoughtful and mature, often helping younger classmates with a patience that seemed beyond his years. The responsibility of being the man of the house, even in a small way, was shaping his character in unexpected directions. Charlotte had developed an imaginary game where she would set a place for William at every meal, chattering to his empty chair as if he were present. Initially, this behavior worried Catherine, but their family counselor assured her that it was a healthy way for Charlotte to maintain her connection to her father. The empty place setting became a family tradition, a daily acknowledgement of William's continued importance in their lives. Meanwhile, in Australia, William was discovering that the mission, while professionally fulfilling, carried its own emotional challenges. His days were filled with diplomatic meetings, cultural exchanges, and ceremonial duties that required his complete attention and energy. But his nights belonged to longing and the constant calculation of time differences that would allow him to connect with his family. He had established his own rituals of connection, writing detailed letters to each family member that went beyond their video conversations. To George, he described the landscapes he was seeing, the different animals he encountered, and the interesting people he met, turning his diplomatic mission into educational adventures that his son could share vicariously. For Charlotte, he collected small treasures, unusual leaves, pretty stones, and photographs of colorful birds that he knew would delight her artistic spirit. William's most challenging moments came during the quiet times between official engagements. In his hotel rooms, surrounded by briefing documents and formal schedules, he would study photographs of his family and wrestle with questions about whether this separation was truly necessary. The intellectual understanding of his mission's importance sometimes felt inadequate when weighed against the immediate ache of missing his children's daily lives. The Australian public and officials he met were universally gracious and understanding about his family situation. Many shared their own stories of separation and sacrifice, helping William understand that his experience, while unique in its public nature, connected him to a universal human experience of love tested by distance and duty. 3 months into the mission, Catherine made the decision to bring the children to Australia for a brief visit during their school holiday. The logistics were complicated, requiring coordination between multiple security services, diplomatic protocols, and media management. But the prospect of reuniting the family, even temporarily, provided hope that sustained everyone through the immediate challenges. The planning for this reunion became a project that engaged the entire family. George studied maps of Australia and researched the places they would visit with his father. Charlotte began practicing the song she wanted to perform for William when they were reunited. Even baby Louis seemed to sense the anticipation in the household, becoming more animated and vocal, as if preparing for his father's return to his daily life. Catherine felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the upcoming reunion. Would the children remember how to be comfortable with William after months of separation? Would the family dynamics feel natural, or would they need time to readjust to being physically together? These concerns occupied her thoughts during the final weeks of preparation, but they were overshadowed by the joy of anticipating her husband's arms around her again. The day of departure for Australia arrived with the organized chaos that accompanied any royal family travel. Catherine had spent weeks preparing for this reunion trip, coordinating with multiple staff members, security teams, and diplomatic officials to ensure that every detail was perfectly arranged. The children's excitement was palpable throughout the palace as they prepared to see their father for the first time in 3 months. George had packed his school journal filled with drawings and stories to show William, while Charlotte insisted on bringing her favorite stuffed animal and a collection of artwork she had created specifically for this reunion. Baby Louis, now walking confidently and babbling constantly, had no understanding of the significance of this journey, but seemed to absorb the anticipatory energy surrounding him. The flight to Australia felt interminable, despite the luxury of the royal aircraft. Catherine found herself constantly checking the time, calculating how many hours remained until she would see William again. The children handled the long journey with remarkable patience, perhaps sensing that this travel was different from their usual trips, more meaningful and emotionally charged. As their plane began its descent into Sydney, Catherine felt her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. She had imagined this reunion countless times over the past weeks, but now that it was actually happening, she wondered if reality could possibly match her expectations. Would William look different after 3 months away? Would the children remember how to be comfortable with their father? At the airport, security protocols required a private arrival away from media attention, but Catherine could see William waiting on the tarmac through the small aircraft window. Even from a distance, she could recognize his posture, the way he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the slight forward lean that indicated his own nervous anticipation. When the aircraft door finally opened, George was the first to spot his father. The young prince's composure completely dissolved as he ran down the steps and launched himself into William's waiting arms. The embrace between father and son lasted several minutes, both of them holding on as if to make up for all the hugs they had missed during their separation. Charlotte was initially shy, hanging back and clinging to Catherine's hand as they approached William. 3 months was a significant portion of her young life, and she needed a moment to reconcile her video call father with the physical reality of his presence. But when William knelt down to her level and began singing one of their special songs, her reserve melted away, and she too found her way into his arms. Baby Louis presented the greatest surprise. He studied William's face carefully, as if trying to place this familiar stranger in his rapidly developing understanding of the world. When William spoke his name in the gentle tone he had always used, Louis suddenly broke into a huge smile and reached for his father with the total trust that only very young children possess. For Catherine, the moment of reunion was almost overwhelming. After months of being strong for her children, managing household responsibilities alone, and maintaining public appearances while privately struggling with loneliness, she finally had the luxury of sharing these burdens again. When William's arms closed around her, she felt a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying finally begin to release. Their private reunion that evening, after the children were settled in their temporary quarters, allowed William and Catherine to truly reconnect as a couple. They talked late into the night, sharing experiences from their months apart, discussing the children's development, and rediscovering the intimate communication that video calls couldn't replicate. The physical presence, the ability to touch and be touched, to read facial expressions and body language without the distortion of screens, felt like a profound gift. The following days in Australia became a carefully balanced combination of official duties and precious family time. William's schedule was modified to allow for maximum family interaction, but he still had commitments that required Catherine to entertain the children and help them understand the importance of their father's work. The children were fascinated by Australia, from the unusual wildlife to the dramatic landscapes that were so different from their English home. George developed an immediate fascination with kangaroos and spent hours asking questions about their behavior and habitat. Charlotte was enchanted by the colorful birds and insisted on drawing pictures of every new species she encountered. During official engagements, the family appeared together when protocol allowed, presenting a picture of unity and strength that resonated with both Australian and international audiences. The public was clearly moved by seeing the family reunited, and the media coverage emphasized the personal sacrifices that royal service sometimes required. However, beneath the public appearances and successful official duties, all four family members were grappling with the knowledge that this reunion was temporary. William still had 2 more months remaining in his mission, and the approaching second separation weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The joy of being together was tinged with the sadness of knowing it would end too soon. The children seemed to understand instinctively that this time with their father was precious and limited. George spent extra time engaged in conversation with William, asking mature questions about the work he was doing and expressing interest in the diplomatic aspects of royal duties. Charlotte was more physically affectionate than usual, constantly seeking cuddles and attention as if to store up love for the difficult weeks ahead. The final 2 months of William's mission passed with a rhythm that had become familiar, yet remained difficult. After the precious week-long reunion in Australia, saying goodbye again had been even harder than the original departure. The children now had fresh memories of their father, making his absence feel more acute and immediate. Catherine found herself drawing strength from that brief time together, while simultaneously counting down the days until his permanent return. The Australian visit had renewed everyone's confidence in their family's resilience, but it also highlighted how much they had all changed during the separation. George had grown more serious and thoughtful, taking his role as the eldest child with newfound gravity. Charlotte had become more independent, learning to comfort herself during difficult moments when her father wasn't available for their usual bedtime rituals. Baby Louis had continued his rapid development, reaching new milestones that William was documenting from afar through photographs and videos. William's final weeks in Australia were marked by a deep sense of professional accomplishment mixed with intense homesickness. The diplomatic mission had achieved all its intended goals. Trade relationships had been strengthened, cultural exchanges had been established, and several humanitarian initiatives had been successfully launched. The Australian government and public had embraced his presence, and international media had praised his effective representation of British interests. Yet none of these professional successes could ease the personal cost of the separation. William found himself marking days on his calendar with the dedication of a prisoner, counting toward release. He had learned to manage the loneliness, to channel his emotions into productive work and to maintain his public composure. But the approaching return to his family occupied his thoughts during every quiet moment. In London, Catherine had also undergone her own transformation. The months of solo parenting had revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She had successfully managed complex household decisions, handled public appearances with grace despite her personal struggles, and most importantly, had kept their family stable and loving during an extraordinarily challenging period. The children's emotional growth during this time would have lasting positive effects. George had developed empathy and maturity beyond his years, learning that love could endure across great distances and that family bonds were stronger than temporary separations. Charlotte had discovered her own resilience, finding creative ways to maintain her connection to her absent father and learning to express her emotions through art and play. As William's final week in Australia arrived, both he and Catherine felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about their reunion. 6 months of separation had changed them all, and they would need time to readjust to being together again. The children had grown and developed in ways William had only been able to witness secondhand, and he worried about feeling like a stranger in his own family. The preparation for William's return became a family project that brought joy and anticipation to everyone involved. George created a welcome home banner with assistance from palace staff, while Charlotte worked on a special song she planned to perform. Even baby Louis seemed to sense the excitement in the household, becoming more animated and vocal as the return date approached. Catherine spent considerable time preparing William's study and their bedroom, wanting everything to feel familiar and welcoming when he returned. She arranged fresh flowers from the palace gardens and placed new photographs of the children around his study, creating a visual record of the months he had missed. The night before William's return, Catherine lay awake thinking about the lessons they had all learned during this separation. They had discovered that their love was indeed strong enough to withstand great challenges, that their family bonds could stretch across oceans without breaking, and that duty and personal happiness, while sometimes in conflict, could coexist when approached with patience and creativity. The morning of William's arrival dawned bright and clear, as if the weather itself was celebrating the family's reunion. The children woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent the morning in eager preparation. George practiced his welcome speech. Charlotte rehearsed her song one final time, and baby Louis babbled happily, dressed in his finest outfit for the occasion. When William's car finally pulled through the palace gates, the family was waiting in the courtyard exactly where they had said goodbye 6 months earlier. The scene was a mirror image of that painful departure, but now filled with joy instead of sorrow. George ran to his father with unrestrained excitement, followed quickly by Charlotte, who had overcome her previous shyness and launched herself into William's arms. Catherine watched from a few steps away as William was reunited with his children, her heart full of gratitude that this long ordeal was finally over. When William looked up and caught her eyes over the children's heads, the communication between them was instant and complete. They had survived their greatest test, and their love had emerged stronger than before. That evening, after the children were settled and the immediate excitement of reunion had calmed, William and Catherine sat together in their private sitting room, exactly where they had shared their painful goodbye 6 months earlier. The room felt complete again with both of them present, and the future stretched ahead filled with the promise of being together as a family, strengthened by the knowledge that their love could overcome any challenge that royal life might present.